The question is, shall it be in order to consider and debate under the impeachment rules any motion to subpoena witnesses or documents? The yeas and nays are required under Senate Resolution 483. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. No. Mr. Barrasso. No. Mr. Blunt. No. Mrs. Blackburn. No. Mr. Bozeman. No. Mr. Braun. No. Mr. Burr. No. Mrs. Capito. No. Mr. Cassidy. No. Mr. Cornyn. No. Mr. Cotton. No. Mr. Kramer. No. Mr. Crapo. No. Mr. Cruz. No. Mr. Daines. No. Mr. Enzi. No. Ms. Ernst. Ms. Ernst, no. Mrs. Fisher. No. Mr. Gardner. No. Mr. Graham. No. Mr. Grassley. No. Mr. Hawley. No. Mr. Hoven. No. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. No. Mr. Inhofe. No. Mr. Johnson. No. Mr. Kennedy. No. Mr. Langford. No. Mr. Lee. No. Mrs. Loeffler. No. Mr. McConnell. No. Ms. McSally. No. Mr. Moran. No. Ms. Murkowski. No. Mr. Paul. No. Mr. Perdue. No. Mr. Portman. No. Mr. Risch. No. Mr. Roberts. No. Mr. Rounds. No. Mr. Rubio. No. Mr. Sass. No. Mr. Scott of Florida. No. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. No. Mr. Shelby. No. Mr. Sullivan. No. Mr. Thune. No. Mr. Tillis. No. Mr. Toomey. No. Mr. Wicker. No. Mr. Young. No.
The motion is not agreed to.